Hello, Endeavor here. So today I'm speaking with Morgoth from the blog Morgoth's Review and from the channel of the same name. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thanks. I don't do many hangouts, but I had a bit of spare time today, and you asked me, so yeah, why not?
Yeah, I wanted to have you on because I really enjoyed your live stream with Millennial with Millennial Woes, and I really enjoyed a lot of your work, and you and Woes really do well together. I wanted to have you on because you had said during the hangout that one thing we really need is a critique of the Enlightenment and a critique of the real foundations of liberalism. And you'd also said how you had kind of seen a re-emergence of neo-reactionary thought coming from guys that were appearing on Millennial, and that's what I had discussed in my hangout, and that's kind of really the focus of my channel. And I'll just remind everyone that to help this stream get out, just hit the like and share. I hate reminding people of that, but it helps us get some more viewers. So you can help me out by doing that. Anyway, I'll pass it over to Morgoth. Why do you think that in the present day, the Enlightenment really needs a critique? Why do you think this is really kind of the core of the problem?
Well, from a sort of 2016 alt-right perspective, one of the things that I kept noticing was that it was in many ways an appeal to liberal morality. And I was getting frustrated with that because it was a sort of glass ceiling. And I mean, an example of that would be the sort of the white genocide meme that gets thrown around. And it's based on the United Nations definition of genocide. Just as an example. And people will say, well, according to the United Nations, what the people in, let's say, Sweden, that fits their own category of a genocide, and it does. Well, I mean, and it's what frustrated me was that the way people would wriggle out of that and say, well, people aren't dying in death carts, they're not being carted off to concentration camps and all of that kind of thing. But whether that fits the United Nations definition of genocide or not, the Swedish people are going to disappear. And it irritated me that there was this appeal to the United Nations, which is essentially a liberal globalist institution, and it's philosophically liberal and humanist. And so you're left with a strange choice. Where is it that because we don't fit the bureaucratic language, the situation in Sweden doesn't fit the right bureaucratic language of the United Nations, will we then just disappear? Or is it the institution itself which is at fault? And I decided that it was the institution itself that was at fault. And so it was time to start digging in deeper to what it was based on, and where they were coming from with this and how it justifies itself.
Well, yeah, because I find that a lot of the real problems we have is that a lot of the things that we talk about on YouTube, that things like, you know, like demographics, or things like the loss of culture, the loss of morality, loss of tradition. I find that a lot of these you can't even really justify through the lens of liberalism. You can't really even justify preserving any of this, because at its core, liberalism is really telling us that the best that we can be is to just be these free, equal individuals who, you know, just pursue their own ends. And, you know, society's kind of, it's a team sport. And, you know, when we talk about like nationhood, when we talk about civilization, it's something grander that we want to preserve. And, you know, I find that you can't really argue for that through liberalism unless you can come up with something that you talk about, like, I don't know, the economy or something. But at the same time, any progressive can just refute that just like that. And it just doesn't even give us the ability to address many of these problems.
I remember when I went through my new atheist phase, and I used to watch Christopher Hitchens, and there's a video where he's talking about Islam. And that's why I watched it, because he was one of the few people around at the time who were actually talking about Islam. And he says that Islam makes great claims for itself, doesn't it? In one of his speeches. And then what he does is holds Islam up to the sort of the scalpel of the Enlightenment, and he invokes John Stuart Mill and all of these Voltaire and these thinkers of the Enlightenment, and I just think, well, yeah, okay, and you know where it's going to go, so you know. He mocks the religion and stuff, but that's not going to stop Muslims. There's nothing in the liberal canon which can stop Muslims at all. And then on top of that, I just thought, well, maybe it's time that we held up these liberal values themselves to this kind of scrutiny. How do they stand up? And so that's what I've kind of been doing. I'm kind of been looking into for the most of last year, really. And yeah, it's wanting. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean the mistake that people like Christopher Hitchens, and I'd say even more so someone like Richard Dawkins makes, and I really like the work that you've done on those guys, on Richard Dawkins. But like one thing he thinks is that like, well, I mean, he's going to be dead at the time, so it's not going to affect him. But he thinks that like, you know, once Muslims make up like 20-30% of our countries, like they're just going to stand on the stage and BBC is going to like crack a joke about them. The guy's going to shake his fist and everyone's going to laugh. I mean, that's not going to happen, because like it's assuming that you're going to actually win someone over through debate, and that everyone is this rational being who will just listen to the evidence, and which even, as you point out, they don't do. But the reality is that they're just gonna behead you. I mean, my friend Fritz Imperial, he made a joke that he had a picture of a jihadist with, you know, one of the ISIS guys holding a sword over Kraut Tea, and then Kraut Tea said, "This is illiberal." Well, you know, it can be as illiberal as you want, but the point is that people don't care. That people don't follow rationality. They don't listen to debate, and at the end of the day, the Islamist, he'll just behead you and go on with his day. He'll say, "Screw your reason and logic," you know.
Yeah, he doesn't care. He doesn't care whatsoever for any of that. And the mistake they make is that if they sort of debunk a religion and make fun of the myths and humiliate Muhammad and things like that, that what they're going to have left over is a rational individual, and you won't. You're just going to have someone that wants to kill you. And with Richard Dawkins, the thing I did with Richard Dawkins was, I mean, Islam's kind of passé, I think, and we have to look more in what's gone wrong with liberalism in the West in relation to Europeans, rather than how it's because the outgroups just rejected out of hand. And where we can look internally is the kind of mentality that Richard Dawkins had. So what you're referring to there was when he got into an argument with this sort of gun-toting MAGA type in America, and it was she made some sort of comment about abortion, and Dawkins is totally pro-abortion, and he said that it was worse that was it. He was going to Africa to protest against the ivory trade and killing elephants. And a woman popped up on Twitter and said to him that it's a shame he doesn't have that kind of empathy for the babies who are being aborted. And Rick Dawkins wrote a blog post explaining that the elephant actually has empathy, it's alive, its family cares about it, and it's a living, breathing creature. And he even called this woman a speciesist, whereas, which I just thought was ridiculous. And then a baby isn't actually conscious, it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have friends, and so on. It's less of a living entity at the moment it's being aborted than what a fully grown elephant is. And I just thought that was the most ridiculous argument I'd ever heard. But, and I call the article Rationalized into Lunacy, it is true from Dawkins' perspective, because he's taking into account only what the baby actually is in the mother's womb, and not what it could become. But as I pointed out in the article, you could say the same thing about a rat. A rat has empathy, and a rat's if a baby rat is killed, its mother will drag it off. It's actually to eat it, I think, but I've actually seen mice do that. So and puppies or whatever, but they do have empathy. They do tick all of the boxes that Richard Dawkins, because at least an elephant is a grand animal, it's impressive and intelligent, but those same traits you can find throughout the animal world. So then Richard Dawkins is saying that we should save the life of a rat, but not an unborn baby. And I just thought that was complete madness. But in order to get around that, you're going to have to admit that you've got something invested in the child, which is beyond purely materialistic ways of understanding the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
And that was when I began to be drawn more to the sort of reactionary kind of people on YouTube and on the internet who were making a comeback. Because if I go back to about 2013, what we would think of as the nationalist or dissident right or alt-right, whatever, on the internet, there was like more of a reactionary presence, but they came across as being too aloof and a little bit pretentious. And what happened was that they kind of got overwhelmed with the alt-right sort of mimetic onslaught, which was about red pilling people as fast as possible and just spreading the word in really simple, basic forms. And that the reactionary scene seemed to sort of peter out. And I think what's happened is that the alt-right have gone as far as they can go with that. And to be fair, many of the people who are now heading towards a more neo-reactionary perspective will be the people who were sort of woken up during the 2016 era, I think.
Yeah, because I think with that Richard Dawkins example, I like the analogy used that he rationalized himself into lunacy, because I mean it's just from the perspective that everyone is rational, everyone is this human being who looks at the evidence and will be convinced by the evidence. You know, if you look at it from that perspective, if you purely take that, I mean, things like childbirth don't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense for a parent to want to raise a kid because it's like, well, what benefit does the kid give them? What doesn't materially make them wealthier. But then it's just something that is innate in all living beings that a parent will care for its young. It's just something that's so like innate that you don't even need to rationalize it. And when you actually do try to rationalize it, you come up with Richard Dawkins saying that a rat matters more than an unborn child. And I mean, this is the real problem, that a lot of the world we live in has been set up based on the fact that these things are true. Like, that we'll be able to just bring people into our countries and educate them, and then they'll all turn into these equal liberal beings. And I mean, it's just not coming true. And the reason I think that this really needs a critique so much is that no one's pointing this out. And I mean, if we abandon a lot of these ideas, a lot of these liberal ideas, I think that our situation immediately would just be better, even given all the problems that we face, because they're only being made worse by just us not accepting these realities about humanity, really.
And I mean, Dawkins is also a massive hypocrite. I just to sort of end the section on Dawkins, is that he actually wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, and it's all about evolution, and which is one of their favorite points. But really, the problem there is that it's already justified why a human would care about an unborn baby more than an elephant or a rat. I mean, he's actually made that argument for us with the selfish gene. But then what they say to that is that we have to then... So on the one hand, they're saying that it's all about evolution, it's all about nature, and we are just, living blobs of flesh and blood. But at the same time, they then will say, well, it's rational. We're rational beings, and so we have to rationalize our way out of the selfish gene which we have, which is to say, we have to wage war against nature, which isn't rational. I mean, it's a constant. It's a sort of false state of affairs. And I just thought, I've had enough of this, and I think a lot of it is him caving in to the left. I mean, we've just had James Watson losing his more awards because he discovered things about race and said things about Africa and basically destroyed his career. And this was the person who discovered the genome or whatever it was. And I mean, again, another problem that I have with the wider liberal project is that they won't actually hold the line on their own core values. They won't hold the line on, but in this case, it's free speech and scientific, the scientific method, the scientific means of understanding the world will be conveniently shelved whenever it suits them, and they're powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah, because I think that one point you had made on Millennial was that, you know, they say that it's based on the science, it's based on the facts only, but then, you know, this biologist, I forget his name, but yesterday he just gets his award taken away for pointing out something that he thought was scientifically true, that being that you know, the bell curve and kind of the discrepancy in IQ. And I mean, that's kind of some, you know, I'm starting to question whether or not we're even going to be, whether or not it's something that we ever really will be able to push through, because, you know, there's just so much institutional opposition to it ever being true. His name was James Watson, someone I put in the chat. And this is the real problem, though, is like, you know, if we're supposed to be this scientific civilization, that, you know, believes the facts, we're not even doing that. And the other example is that is institutional racism. Like I've said a lot that, you know, what the most powerful institutions in our society, what our governments will do is they'll blame some like fictitious racism that's just in the air whenever there's a society with white people in it, rather than just saying, well, certain groups might commit more crimes, certain groups might be more apt to do poorly in education, and, you know, they all hammer it down to just, it must be white people being racist without any evidence whatsoever. In fact, with evidence to the contrary, when you have like all these affirmative action laws, when you have the academy stacked with leftists, and they can't just accept they can't even accept the reality that people could be different, and, you know, people are all from these different societies, and, you know, they've developed differently, and, you know, you can't just cram everyone together. It's the blank slate. It's the blank slate argument, and it's just making our governments just do the most crazy actions just to try to manufacture equality. Like an example I think an example that I came across in Canada was that the native population, they're a lot more likely to be imprisoned, like something like 25% of the prison population. Well, but they only make up around 3% of the total population. And the answer the government gives is that it's because we're racist against them, and the solution is to give them less time in jail. I mean, it's just crazy when you have this blank slate ideology, and it's just so manifestly not true.
I mean, one of the things that I find again and again with the broad liberal ideals is I mean, to get back to the thing we were talking about the African Americans. Let's just keep it nice and politically correct. I'm trying to be less abrasive when I go on live streams and stuff. Is that when you, on the one hand, classic liberalism did kind of justify them being desegregation, because they didn't have much to argue against that, because if you use the individualist argument, then they were just American citizens and they should be allowed to go wherever they like. So in that sense, it did have that universalist side to it. So that's where the problem first started. And then the second problem was, well, they are different. But this time, classic liberalism failed because they couldn't hold the line on the scientific side of race. That was just forgotten, just shelved. And so then you ended up where you do have these different groups, and one group is having a hard time of it. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of poverty. And then it opens the way to the social justice movement, which classic liberals complain about all day. Because you're going to have a lot of just normal white people, maybe a little bit leftist, and they're going to see that the black populations in America are living in poverty and they're having a bad time. And then they're going to say, well, because race is removed, we can't talk about racial differences. So now we're going to have to find out why that is so, why this is happening. Now, the one way you could go with that would be just to have a sort of hardline Reaganite take on it and say, well, they're all just individuals. It just so happens that they've all got the same color. And they're just, I don't know where you go with that. But the way that a sort of soft, open-hearted lefty is going to look at it is that they're being oppressed by the system. So the system's against them, when in actual fact it's not really. It's just that there's differences with humans. And so on the one hand, liberalism opened the gates to the problem, and then the sort of secondly, they couldn't then deal with the problem that they'd created. Another one is the argument in, like, say, with England or in Europe, when we have mass immigration. And okay, so to be fair, a lot of them will not like that, though Richard Dawkins is for that. And so on the one hand, we get stabbed in the back by the elites and they flood the country with immigrants. And then the classic liberal, who couldn't stop that from happening in the first place and didn't raise any objection to that happening, not very much, then turns around and says, but you can't strip citizens of their citizenship. You can't take away their passports and you can't send them back. That will be that's against my liberal principles. And I just think, well, it's again and again, you're powerless. You're either in favor of the problem or you're working against any kind of solution to the problem. And it just happens over and over again with the classic liberal set. A classic example would be where they actually facilitated the non-stop attacks on the church. They were pro-porn, and then they're against any kind of regulation, and the society just goes down the toilet, really.
Well, yeah, because you can't really justify preserving any kind of morality when you have this belief, kind of like the Rousseauian belief that and this is like one of the ideas I really just despise, the idea that man is born free but everywhere he's in chains. Well, I mean, that's basically the belief that we just need to like tear down more and more. We just constantly need to just be tearing down our all the structure in our society. And then, you know, when you don't get a free society, when you don't get what Rousseau said you would, well, then you have no means of actually fixing the problem, because then it would be an infringement on people's rights to try to restore any of these barriers that existed in the past that prevented these things from happening. And the other point you had made on the classic liberals not being able to really come to an answer. A great example of this was the Jordan Peterson Monk debate, where he talked with Michael Eric Dyson. And, you know, from that, one thing that really showed was that when the classical liberals are pushed on their on the kind of the foundations of their beliefs, so that being like equality, they can't argue with the Marxists, because, you know, if you're assuming that equality is true and in this liberal system you're not getting equality, then the Marxists are right that it is just this oppression. Like in the Monk debate, you could see the entire time, and I didn't watch the whole thing because I don't have time for that, but the entire time that I watched, Michael Eric Dyson just had Peterson by the balls, because he just had to go with slavery, segregation, you know, you just basically all the basic talking points that you'd expect. And Peterson can't even reply to them. All he can really say is just, well, you know, we should try to treat people as individuals. And I mean, there's no real critique that liberalism can't really even defend itself from the critiques from the Marxists, because, you know, if you're coming from the perspective that all you need to do is just educate people and then they'll all be these equal individuals, then the Marxists are correct, because when they point out that, yes, there are certain, like, you know, for example, the black population in the United States, they are doing worse, and it's in a liberal system. So unless we're gonna say, you know, there might be differences between people, then the Marxists are right. And that, I mean, this is why I think that liberalism just can't answer the problems of the present day. And this is why I just think that neo-reaction is so important.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm happy to see it sort of coming out from the shadows recently, and because it's nice to have. I mean, another thing that I've noticed is where it's just for a lot of the sort of alt-right type scene, it's just constant bad news. It's constant the newspaper headlines of rapes and stabbings and the latest outrage. I get bombarded with this stuff. And it's nice to just take a step back and have a look at the bigger picture and have a bit more nuanced and thoughtful content. And I think it's really valuable to have. And you can reappreciate, if that's a word, some of like the sort of the culture around you a bit. I mean, I just did this post on a YouTube video on Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Series, which again, it is a sort of technocratic liberal order which has been pre-planned and implemented across the galaxy. And in that, what I get into in the video, in that the people don't actually know that there is a plan, that they don't, because it's a sort of liberal tyranny in a way, because the more people, the more somebody thinks they're free when they're actually being manipulated, it's very, very difficult to get them out of that. Whereas if somebody's just oppressed, then they're aware of it. And this is a fine line that the system's having to walk at the moment. How many more hate speech laws can they actually bring in? And I mean, in that way, somebody might say, well, in that way, the classic liberal types are actually fighting for free speech. And you're someone like me is going to benefit from that, and that's true enough. Actually, that's true enough. I mean, what do you think about the free speech issue of classic liberalism?
I mean, I stand with them in that the free speech issue is something that's really big. But what I'd probably say to them is that, look, I mean, there are some nuggets you can probably take out of classic liberalism, like like free speech is not a bad idea. Free association is not a bad idea. Right to self-determination, and these are not bad ideas. But the problem is that I don't think liberalism is going to really give us them in the 21st century because of the aforementioned problems. And at the same time, I think it was a system that was designed for a different era. When John Locke was writing, he was writing in England in the 17th century, and back then it was a Christian European state with limited suffrage, and we just don't have that anymore. And I think if kind of the ends that the classic liberal is seeking, I think that many of them might be virtuous, but the problem is that I don't think they're going to get them through liberalism. And I think that this is kind of why I find that neo-reaction, it really is a way of describing these problems and kind of coming to I think it can be found to come to more conclusions. Like, for example, the idea that your society should be one that the entire point of it is just democracy and freedom and kind of the very basis that we have today. I think that you can't really run one on that. You need one that's in order to preserve something that's a lot higher. So in order to preserve a culture, and kind of just maintain a lineage, I guess. And you kind of need that to be your highest good, because if your highest good is just be as free as possible, then you're not going to be able to justify preserving any of these things. So I think that's really where we need to come from. It's that a lot of the beliefs of liberalism, they turn out to be false. But I think that the ends that the people that believe in it today are seeking, I think that they can be met, but not through liberalism.
I think up to World War II, Christianity was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for liberalism, for the wider Western liberalism as we understand it. I think Christianity was doing most of the work for it in terms of maintaining a civilizational structure and a spiritual life. And hold on, there's must be a hate crime down the road. And after World War II, and of course, all during that, the sort of 100 years up to World War II, the Enlightenment liberals were gnawing away at Christianity like rats on a rope. And eventually, when we get after World War II, Christianity was really viciously attacked and debunked and humiliated. And so, for the first time, I think, classic liberalism was expected to stand on its own 2 feet without having an overarching civilizational structure behind it. And what happened was that it got instantly cooked by the left, by sort of the new Marxists left. And that's been the case up until today.
Oh yeah, I would agree because, like I had mentioned that, you need that civilizational foundation that goes beyond the liberal order. That was Christianity for a long time. And and when liberalism was conceived of, it was assumed that that would be the foundation that it would be working with. And yeah, the problem is that when that's not there, then basically the left wins, because when you take away kind of the Christian morality, when you take away the foundation that provides, then you can't really justify any of these things. And when the left comes out and says we need mass migration, or when they come out and say that gender doesn't exist, well then if you're not coming from a Christian standpoint, when you're coming from from just nothingness, then and you're just doing pure liberalism, then all this gender nonsense that we have now may make sense, because it's just a restriction on freedom. Who are we to say that an 8-year-old can't can't be chemically castrated if they want to? We're just trying to restrict their freedom. And the problem is, no, Christianity was the force that prevented that stuff from happening, because it provided that moral framework. But when that's gone, you just end up with, well, transgender children.
I mean, the trans issue was largely seen as being part of the sort of the social justice army, like a little division within the cultural Marxist legion, and which are becoming more and more prominent. But when their argument is essentially a liberal one, because they're saying that their individuality can't be properly, they don't get their proper respect as an individual, because they're not having the right gender pronouns. They're not being called he or she or whatever it happens to be. And so in that way, that that infringes upon them as an individual. That's actually a liberal argument, I would say. It's just that it's backed up by cynical Marxists who know that it's just chipping away at the fabric of Western identity.
Yeah, and I think that the real problem with it is that you can't run a long-term civilization when you're aborting the young, when you're giving your children sex changes, when you're importing mass third world migration. You can't run a civilization for long periods of time. And in the past, they had structures in place that were designed to take the civilization that they lived in beyond their lifetimes. It was designed to take it from one century to the next. And the problem is that with this mindset that you just need to be an individual, you just need to, and no one can impede on your personal freedom, and just do whatever you want as long as you're not harming others. It destroys civilizations, in that it basically makes it that you can't even justify the preservation of your own society, and over a period of time, it's just going to cease to exist. And we're seeing that over the last 70 years. Just so much of our culture, so much of Western civilization has just been stripped away, and we are in the point that unless there is a change, unless we do have a change in direction, the default outcome is that these states that implemented liberalism will eventually just cease to exist, because they've been deconstructed by it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways it's the individualist argument is also just so retarded because it's as if they're not being affected by the wider culture or what's going on around them. An example of this, which is a bit of, I'm going to approach it delicately, would be the porn industry and the normalization of gay marriage. And if you go back to, say, the 70s or something, the idea of anal sex was something that was seen as being disgusting, and it carried this huge stigma. And in that way, if say, a young lad had a girlfriend and he wanted to do anal sex on her, then she could, with the whole weight of the society behind her, call him a perv and tell him to get lost and go away. And everything, all the structures and the morality of the society would back her up. Now it's different. Now, when that same thing plays out, the onus is on her to explain why she doesn't want him to do that. And this is an example of how the weight of the morals of the society can be brought to bear on individuals, even though it's beyond themselves. So what we're expecting then is that she will have the wherewithal to sort of refute the dominant morality of the society, which is the normalization of gay sex. But from a liberal perspective, they would ignore all of that and just put it down to the decisions of the people made there and then on the spot. And that's why I think it's just completely retarded and blind. I mean, especially the cultural problem, like I explained there, is especially toxic to it. It just goes through it like acid. They can't see beyond the individual, and that's not the way the world is.
Yeah, and Academic Agent had actually released a video this week that was really interesting, and it kind of punched a hole in another one of the assumptions that liberalism makes. It's the kind of the free marketplace of ideas one, and you'll constantly hear people like Jordan Peterson or some of the I know that the skeptic community is not really a thing anymore, but they used to use that line a lot back in the day. The video was that Academic Agent had released was about the attitudes in the United Kingdom towards homosexuality and how the attitudes towards it progressed along with the promotion of it. And pretty much what he had showed was that while it was being heavily promoted in the 1980s, the vast majority of people were strongly opposed to it. And that continued up until the 2000s when I guess they just got overwhelmed by it. And he had made a really interesting point that Margaret Thatcher had said something about it not being promoted, and that only about 15 years later, under legislation passed by Tony Blair, what Margaret Thatcher had said, which was heavily backed by everyone in the society, that would have been a crime. And I mean, it just kind of really punched a hole in the idea that, this free marketplace of ideas, the best idea wins. And really, I mean, what we're really seeing, I think, and I'm kind of beginning to see this a lot more and more, is that there really is very few debate. There is very little debate over a lot of these issues, and it really just seems to be what powerful institutions want. I mean, you could make the same argument with immigration. Like, you can look at polls from the UK, you can look at polls from Canada, and throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, people have always been against it. Yet it always just goes up, and in every single European country, it's one of the top issues, and yet there's no action on it. And it's like, where is this free marketplace of ideas? Where is where is the representation? Where is the representation of the view that the people have? I mean, it just seems like it's all a complete lie.
Yeah, I mean, I remember after we had the BNP surge, which was a genuine nationalist party, about 10 years ago and throughout the early 2000s. And yeah, they were pretty hardcore by today's standards. But then the state infiltrated the party. The party was bankrupted. The party was taken to court. New laws were passed so that their policies were illegal. And eventually the party was just destroyed, really. But then after it happened, you had like the sort of liberal intelligentsia, the lefty intelligentsia, saying that we had the debate and the public had decided that the BNP wasn't for them. But in actual fact, when you removed the name, when you just listed out their policies and you removed the name of the BNP, they were like easily the most popular positions to hold, policies to have in the country. It was just that they were, first of all, they were toxified, they slurred, slandered, and smeared just relentlessly. I mean, worse than Trump got. But then on top of that, they were infiltrated and destroyed. And then after it all crashed and burned, it was passed off as if, well, we've had that public debate over these ideas, and the public decided that they didn't want them. And I thought, no, that wasn't what happened at all. What happened was that the elite destroyed the party and brainwashed the public.
Yeah, and I think that what it kind of strikes at the heart of is the idea that liberalism gives us the ability to be represented, to that we're consenting to our rule because we elect our officials, and that's what's ruling us. And I think that the more you look at it, the more it really resembles just authoritarian rule in any other state. That really it's under the liberal system. It really is just what the elites want. And you had actually written a really great article about authoritarianism. And I guess I think we've addressed the problems with liberalism. I kind of would like to get to some solutions. So what's your kind of thoughts on authoritarianism? I guess for people who haven't read the article, what did you say in it?
Well, yeah, I did get into a bit of trouble because it was so blatant. But I mean, it is. I think if you're on the right, philosophically, then you are in the business of protecting things, and that you are going to have to shut people down. You are going to have to stop people from doing things which are destructive and nihilistic. And I think as things progress, people are going to cry out for that more. But of course, I deliberately call it authoritarianism because I thought, I'm not going to try and slip this in through the back door. May as well just lay my hands on the table and then ask whether or not it's feasible. I just wanted to sort of break through this idea of this liberal paradigm and open up some other ways of thinking about it. I mean, one of the things that interests me, that the liberals on YouTube really seem to love people like Viktor Orban. But Viktor Orban isn't a liberal. He's not their guy. He throws people out. He bans people from the country. He shuts down left-wing media organizations and all that kind of thing. He specifically said that he wasn't going to have liberal democracy. He was going to have Christian democracy. But you see, then they want to be edgelords, and they want to sort of own that. The sort of YouTube liberals, but that's not actually the case. He's actually of the right. And he is using authoritarianism to protect the Hungarian people. Because what you could do, let's just say, he could allow the marketplace of ideas to happen, and then Hungary could be infiltrated with social justice warriors, George Soros. Money would start funding little organizations, maybe some websites which were promoted, and maybe a university course here or there. And what you'd find is that concepts such as white privilege would start slipping into the Hungarian lexicon, or the idea that there was something dark and guilty about Hungary's past. And God knows, in Eastern Europe, they've got enough to dig up. But and the question is whether or not you would allow that to grow legs and run amok in the society, or if you would just snuff it out from the inception. And I think for the general good, you'd have to say, well, let's just snuff it out at the beginning. And I mean, that can actually be done in Eastern Europe, but we're way past that point in the West now. It's sort of trench warfare.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree that in the case of Hungary, if you just allow this free marketplace of ideas, we're going to see what would happen in our countries, that there really never was a debate, and that essentially these powerful organizations have just put so much pressure on getting through these left-wing ideas that they're just able to take over, and there never is that debate. And I really thought that you had made a great point, that essentially Orban he's using right-wing authoritarianism to fight left-wing authoritarianism, and that's really the only way to do it. And I think that I think that kind of one of the things that people need to understand is that, like, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, is that your civilization has a foundation that you need to protect. And Viktor Orban understands that what he needs to protect is the Hungarian people, Hungarian culture, their and kind of their nation state, and their ability to carry that into the future. And that really the policies in order to do that are really secondary. And if allowing for this if allowing for your enemies to subvert you is going to through liberalism is going to take that away, well, then you're not going to take that deal, because you're betraying the very thing that you're fighting for. When I think he understands that he's fighting for his nation state, and not necessarily for some vague concepts of democracy and liberalism and freedom, and that really don't make any sense. He's fighting for something that's really concrete. And you are right that we are just past that point in our countries, that we don't really have that ability. But yeah, go ahead.
So it's Stefan Molyneux's trip to Poland. I did a little video on it as well, so this is like, he's like the archetype of empiricism, and he says it in his video on Poland. He's the rationality, and data, evidence. I mean, what's that thing that Molyneux always says? Your feelings aren't an argument, or whatever it is. So he's like the man, and he went to Poland on a sort of nationalist march and broke down in tears at how it was homogenous, it was traditional, it felt like home, and yeah, he had to admit, like, I'm an empiricist, which is of course their classic liberal core value, and I can't help but admit that this is better than a multicultural society. Well, yeah, that's fair enough. But then when you look at what actually holds Poland in place, is its staunch Catholicism. It is a homogeneous country, and they will have a sort of conservative authoritarian streak where they'll not. I think there was actually something where they just took over the media, or there was something that had the left in Britain howling with anger about a year ago, where there was something was passed in Parliament which basically handed the BBC of Poland into the hands of a really hardline conservative movement in Poland. And so again and again, you look at what it is that's holding Poland in place as a more or less decent European country to live in. And then I thought, and I pointed out on the video, that in actual fact, Molyneux's liberalism would negate every one of the things that makes Poland, which has made Poland so nice that it's brought them to tears. So you would have your Richard Dawkins types tearing into Catholicism and real Christianity in general, and wanting to replace it with the rats and the elephants. Unborn babies are less important than a rat or an elephant. That kind of ridiculous materialism. Then you'd have the ethnic fabric of the country could be broken up, because they don't see racial groups or ethnic groups either. It's all just individuals. So then it becomes easy to argue that you can just shift people around like economic units. And then they would start and complain that, well, we have to have a sort of open press that has to be open to everything, and nothing can be shut down. So you ended up being flooded with all manner of filth from the West. In each case, the liberal values would have undermined what made Poland so attractive to a classic liberal in the first place.
Yeah, I think Molyneux's actually abandoning a lot of his old ideas, because I think he's probably just seeing that they just don't work in actuality, really. The problem that we have as sort of nationalists is that vacuum, I think, where, I used to think it was ridiculous when people would argue that race isn't enough. You can't build a movement on that alone. And I think a lot of that was the American wing of the alt-right was very much based on, we're happy to remain what we are as these sort of global homo consumer units, as long as we're in an all-white America, or chunk of America. And I don't think that's enough. That's dodging the bullet
for like maybe a few decades, but not really getting to the root of the problem. And that's, I think, because America is fundamentally founded on these classic liberal values.
Yeah, I said that back in the day also, was that, that's kind of just the problem with the hard line, I like, some people have used the phrase race idolatry. It's just that, like, you can't have a movement that's just based on race, because then you'll basically have all the same problems. Maybe you wouldn't have the immigration problem, but then that might come about a few decades later. But when you look at somewhere like say Japan or South Korea, they don't have the same problem with things like Islam or migration, but at the same time they pretty much are displaying all the same problems that the West, in the West. And for me, it's like, that's not what I'm fighting for. That's not what I'm not interested in. Just having modernity, but with just with more white people. I think we need something more than that.
It does seem to be that the common denominator of a society which is liberal, with or without immigration, is that you no longer have enough children. Your birth rate just falls through the floor. And because one of the arguments which irritated me that I'd see people making on YouTube, classic liberal types, would be that nobody is stopping white women having children. Like, if white women are choosing not to have children, and that you're not keeping up with women from Pakistan or whatever, that's their personal choice. And I always thought that was I always hated that argument, but I could see the logic behind it. Well, of course, the difference is that the European women are living, they're saturated within a liberal paradigm, which the Pakistani women are not, even if they're living in England. Metaphysically, they're not living in that same culture. They're living in an Islamic one. It's just that they're in England. And so in that sense, we can see that liberalism is the problem again. And we would say, well, how is liberalism stopping European women from having more children? And it's actually a lot of points. That it is feminism, it is the working, it is the media, it's the hedonism, and it's all of these different points which add up to a society and a people which are just utterly decayed and worn out and nihilistic. But they would say that what you've got to do is bring in all of the different sort of bad points that liberalism brings to the table. And there's really a lot.
Yeah. And I think that in terms of like finding solutions to these, I mean, it's definitely not going to be easy, but I think that I think that pre-Enlightenment thought really, it gives a lot of answers into really what we need in order to overcome these problems. And, this is kind of why I think that neo-reaction is just such an important, it's just something so important to look into today. It's because it actually can offer some solutions. And I think that one of them is just the acknowledgement that, man in nature is not born free, but everywhere in chains. He's not free in nature. He's actually a very brutal and savage creature. And I think that the answer is that, people need a set of morality. They need kind of some structure, and they really need to have a system around them that, guides man from his kind of brutal nature into a more productive and more virtuous being. And I think that that's kind of an acknowledgement that we need to have if we're actually going to address any of these problems.
I mean, first we have to address that there is a problem. And when you look at England, I did a video a week or two back about the state of people just falling around the street drunk all over the Christmas holidays, and the girls are pretty much naked, rolling around in a puddle of puke on the pavement. And you have to think to yourself, well, is it enough? Is this enough now? Or, because is it possible to fill this vacuum with something? And I'm beginning to think that it actually is, because it's funny in a way, because they're not ideologues in the way that sort of people of the left are. certain chunks of society are. There's just a sort of void there, and it's waiting for something positive to attract them, I think.
Yeah, I think so too, because I find that a lot of people that are caught up in it, they aren't ideologues, because they haven't come to these conclusions just because it's the default of them living in a society that's just been eaten, its morality has just been eaten away. And I think if we actually were able to provide an alternative and actually able to provide something that would pull people out of it, I think that there would be lots of people that would be drawn to it. Because, like for me personally, the reason I just got into all this stuff to begin with is because I really just kind of found modernity and the society of kind of consumerism and hyper individualism. I just found it depressing, and I was just dying for alternatives. And I think that there has to be more people out there that definitely want alternatives. And if we're actually able to offer people that, then I think you'd be able to get you'd probably have a lot of people looking for something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the sort of working class types who have just fallen to complete. They're just a wreck in England, and it is different. It's not like the country is overrun with sort of politically correct drones. They're like that's a sort of middle class left wing phenomenon, and they do have their own sort of value system of the brotherhood of man and all of these ridiculous dreams that they're fed. But there is a huge chunk of the population who have just wandered off the plantation, really, and they just don't care. They're not interested in anything at all. And they're mainly seen as a hindrance. But they could be brought on board if there's something positive there. And the obvious one here would be: is it possible to breathe life back into the Christian church? And I don't know, because they've been deliberately programmed to sort of tune out from anything spiritual or metaphysical.
Yeah, I really like the video that you had made about the Snowman, about the movie, the Christmas movie, the Snowman, and that it was kind of just it was just something that was really just enjoyable, and it didn't need to be deconstructed, it didn't need to be rationalized. It was just kind of this heartwarming Christmas special that that anyone can enjoy, even lefties, because it's kind of a calling to something deeper. But I guess I'll let you explain like what that video was about.
It's funny because I actually deconstructed it, but I didn't want to. But the thing is, the Snowman, like you say, with all political stripes, people, especially in Britain, I don't know how well it's traveled around the world. After I did the video, a lot of people from all over were saying that they liked it. But it does give a special glow to people, this cozy, comforting feeling. What interested me was to try and get back to that, to try and figure out what the component parts of that were, so that we can start and hand that over to people and draw them in, rather than like a sort of happy merchant meme or a white genocide statistic. And maybe that's the way to go. But first we have to understand what it is, and you break it down into its component parts. And at the root of it was identity. It was a recognition of the familiar, which the Snowman as a whole is. But then within the Snowman itself, it's the way the South Downs in Sussex are sort of it's drawn with charcoal, and everything about it does give off a warm and comforting feeling. And I think that is something to think about, because it's what people of all political stripes want into. And it is a sort of slightly Heideggerian take, which is something that I've started to look into. Well, it's very complex, where you have this sort of technocratic grid of pure materialism and empiricism and rationality across the world. But every now and then there's this sort of clearing moment, and you get the authentic again. And I definitely think the Snowman is an instance of that. And so it interested me to try and sort of describe what that was. And like I said before, where it was when we're talking about why European women don't have children as much as they should, then it's not one thing; it's multiple things which culminate in low birth rates. At the same time, it's multiple facets which add up to create an actual identity and a feeling of belonging.
Yeah,
And that's kind of what I got into. It's
and
not just one thing.
yeah, and when I look back at at history, and when I look at kind of the pre-enlightenment era, and really even time after that, a lot of really what made Western civilization so great was things that they didn't need to like put on a spreadsheet. It was things that they didn't need to rationalize. They didn't need to like write down why we celebrate this, why this is something we hold sacred. And I think that if we offer people something that just wasn't like just constant deconstruction, like for example, I can still enjoy like going out fishing for an afternoon up in northern Ontario. I can still enjoy like an evening at the shooting range, and like all these things. It's like it's stuff that you don't need to rationalize. It's something that you don't need to just like break down and explain why you enjoy it. Like in the 16th century, they weren't writing down why we should be Christians. They weren't writing down why we should make this great art, why we should do this, that, and the other. They were really just doing it because it was something that mattered to them, and in many ways they didn't need rationality. They didn't need Richard Dawkins there telling them why this is scientifically beautiful and why this is not. It was kind of just something that they appreciated without that kind of justification for it. And I find, and this is kind of also one of the problems with kind of the race realism debate, is that it kind of the same thing is that a lot of people will just ignore it because of the aforementioned reason that people aren't really these rational beings. But then at the same time, I don't really think you should need like a scientific proof to preserve, to not like throw away your nation state. You shouldn't need scientific proof to not throw away your culture. I think like we should want to maintain our nation states because there's something they mean something higher to us, and that's something we really don't even need to justify. Like for example, Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton had said in one of his books, and I highly recommend the book Orthodoxy for anyone that would like a good critique of kind of the Enlightenment skepticism. What he said was that he was an Englishman. What he said was that the patriot doesn't love England because of some rationality. He loves it without a reason, and that's what he fights for. He doesn't need to think of something in England that matters to him. It's the thing that it's valuable in itself, and he doesn't need to justify that. And I think that's really how a movement, kind of a traditional movement, to really restore a lot of the things that we've, maybe not even restore, but at least find something new that's really that we can really appreciate, and the kind of an alternative to just the kind of nihilism of modernity. I really think that's what it's going to come from. It's not going to come from some like scientific proof. It's not going to come through argumentation. It's really just going to come from kind of a love and a desire for something meaningful that matters a bit more.
It's funny you mentioned fishing, because I'm a bit of a fisherman myself, and I actually love to. I've got a dog. I've got a terrier, and then I head off early in the morning down to the coast, and depending on what time of year it is, I prefer the spinning rod, but because it's good fun to mess about with it, But you do get that tranquil feeling fishing. I mean, before I only took it out a few years ago, but you do get that feeling of peace and tranquility with fishing. And I have actually wondered why that is the case. And I think part of it is because you're not, I mean, I'm not connected to any electronic devices. I don't have to go anywhere or do anything. And you're focused in the here and now, in nature, with the waves gently lapping up against the rocks. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing to do. And it's such a shame that so few people get into these things these days, because there again, you have that, in a way, when you're on the dissident right, you are trapped in this sort of frenetic cyber world of memes and rat-tat-tat arguments and gotcha moments. And it is worth thinking about how you can just step outside of that and rationalize and break that down, the sort of argument itself, and dig into something a lot deeper and grandiose, I think. Well, of course, fishing's just an example, but the same is what I was trying to get to with the Snowman. It's to get to this clearing, this authentic way of being, rather than the fakeness of social media and the mainstream media as well.
Yeah, and I think that I have to think that that's kind of what's really going to drive a revival in kind of tradition, and a revival in an appreciation for these more things that we've really seemed to have lost. It's going to be just like you said, a longing for authenticity and just kind of a way of escaping the I guess the kind of global homo materialism that we've kind of been handed. And going back to kind of the point is that this is one thing that I really find I'd say really relieving about near reaction, is that it doesn't it kind of just, you don't need to constantly break things down. You don't need to constantly deconstruct things. You don't need to constantly just try to justify why something matters to you. It's just it matters to you because it's something that that really is really just authentic. And one example I think of is that I was actually planning, I might make a video about this eventually, but there was this lefty that I know that this person, the entire mainstream media agrees with them. This person, I think he works in education, so the entire education system agrees with him. Basically, all these social causes that he keeps championing, they all keep coming true. And yet this guy is the most miserable individual I've ever met. They can't go a minute without complaining about something. And I find it's just this constant need to just break down, and this constant need to just tear apart. I think that that's something that people don't like that. I think kind of the Richard Dawkins point is that Richard Dawkins isn't going to go into a church and in front of he's not going to barge into a church during worship and say, aren't you guys ridiculous for doing this? They're not going to sit there listening to his arguments. They're just going to throw him out. I think it's because people at the end of the day don't want just constant tearing down. They really want something to be preserved, and I think that is what the right really represents. It's conserving and maintaining something for the long term, and I think that's kind of an advantage that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking before we went live about Steven Pinker, who wrote that book, Enlightenment Now, last year, and in Quillette yesterday he published a sort of refutation to his critics, and one of the bits that I'll just have a look at what it is I wanted to get into here, because really his book took a lot of criticism, but one of the reasons why it did so is because he produced endless graphs. And I think there's 700 graphs, something ridiculous in the book, and it's he's trying to, obviously it's just stats and raw data, and he's in this article in Quillette. He makes the point that where is it? I'm just looking for it now. Where how do you explain Donald Trump and this is the question being asked to him. And it's a lengthy answer. I'll just read out the first paragraph. How do you explain Donald Trump and Brexit and authoritarian populism? Don't they spell the end of the Enlightenment and the reversal of progress? And he says, though the Enlightenment ideals of disinterested reason, scientific naturalism, cosmopolitan humanism, democratic institutions, and human progress offer the best prospects for humanity, they are by no means intuitive. People easily slide back into motivated cognition, magical thinking, tribalism, authoritarianism, and nostalgia for a golden age. Well, and he goes on and on. And one of the things he also points out is that Donald Trump's demographic base, which is working class America, white working class Americans mainly, is shrinking, and that's just a sort of magical event. So in Pinker's world, this is just something magical that's happening. It's just a force of nature. It's just the ebb and flow of history. But he doesn't consider that maybe they don't want to shrink. Maybe they want to remain a majority in their own country. But that's what he calls xenophobia and racism. And what he points out there basically is just an endless list of supranational institutions. And then he'll have these graphs which say things like, because the people in Indonesia have 2 bowls of rice a day instead of 1, the overall level of poverty across the world has decreased. So therefore, enlightenment is good. And this is what I got into in the foundation video that I did, where it becomes really autistic, because then it's like this grid, like I mentioned before, this technocratic grid of materialism sort of working its way around the world. If you try and get out from under that, you're the problem. But in the case of Trump's base, it's okay because they're going to disappear soon anyway. And this is the Enlightenment ideals. And it gets back to what you were saying before, where why should the people have to explain why they don't want to become even fewer in number than what they are? I mean, is it then bad for, can Danish people decide to just check out of this system, this grid? Or are they then also a bunch of, are they then too sliding into authoritarianism and bigotry and populism?
Yeah.
It's
Go ahead.
It's actually a tyrannical way to look at the world. It's totally inhuman. And I mean, I started off talking about Richard Dawkins and the idiotic argument about the elephant being more important than an unborn baby. But here you have that same mentality again, but at the macro level, looking at the entire planet.
Oh yeah, and I find like Steven Pinker, he to me just embodies just this, really what I despise about these Enlightenment ideas and just the nihilism involved with them. Like when you listed off those institutions that he had said, like democracy and all those other things, like that just when I hear those words, I know it's just going to be nihilist, empty, depressing, just shit, really. And well. Like you said, like Trump's base, they don't want to be replaced, and they want to, their country to remain the country that they love. And when I hear like all these things about like all those like Steven Pinker institutions and all that stuff, I find like I don't care about any of that stuff. Like what matters to me, and for example, when I go up to Northern Ontario and like I'll walk into a place there, there'll be some old guy. He speaks with an accent, like a Canadian accent, and he talks about his hunting stories, and there's skins on the wall and all that stuff. Like that. That's what matters to me. And like Steven Pinker saying to me, well, authoritarianism, democracy, egalitarian, blah 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 blah, racism. Like I just want to say fuck that shit. It's like I just want something human, and I think that really was kind of one of the driving forces behind the white working class backing Trump, because they don't want to be told what to do by some fart sniffer in the academy. They just want their kind of their neighborhoods, their states, and their country to just be a home to them that they can really enjoy and just feel like it's theirs. And just these Enlightenment values of Steven Pinker, they go so against that, and like just the need to constantly to tear that down, and that you can just use rationality and make it all go away. It's such a lie. And I think that Distributus had actually made a good video on Steven Pinker, and that he was basically saying like how the Enlightenment was going to put all the problems behind us, and that like empathy and science was, which, you know, empathy is not part of science, was going to make multiculturalism work. And what Distributus had pointed out was that this stuff doesn't work, and it's just so manifest that diversity does not create empathy. It does not create belonging. It actually very much destroys that. And I think that it's this Steven Pinker kind of view of the world. This is what really gave a rise to things like to these problems of the present day. Like, you can talk about like the far left, you can talk about Islam, but the reality is it's this kind of Enlightenment view of the world of people like Steven Pinker that decided that we had to like play with that we had to like, you know, tear apart and deconstruct what was really what you know, a society that had problems, but overall didn't need to be torn apart. And it was these ideas that are really kind of causing these problems, and like that. And I find like if we're going to solve them, I think like we really kind of just need to reject those the Steven Pinker ideas, and just you kind of have something a lot more natural. And I think that nationalism really is just a force that really cuts across the grain when it comes to these beliefs, because these guys can constantly write them off. You know, Richard Dawkins can call people that voted for Brexit little Englanders, but at the end of the day, these people they're fighting for something that kind of matters a bit more. And, you know, no matter what some, you know, big-brained scientist tells them, you know, humanity kind of prevails in that sense.
It's kind of a paradox as well in the way, because some people will look up, say, I wrote an article which was really popular called "In Defense of Authoritarianism," and it'll be like, "Whoa, this guy's such a fascist." But at heart, I am just a little Englander. I do just want to be a hobbit in the Shire and have my own little place in the world with me woman and me dog and me fishing rod and live out my life quite happily. But I know that the Steven Pinkers of this world are not going to allow me to have it. And you end up sort of, at first you're thinking, I wish they'd just go away, but they won't. And then a few years later, you're thinking that what will it take to tear down their entire worldview and replace an entire sort of metaphysical existence of man? And at the end of it, you think, all I ever wanted to do was sit in my patch of England and be left alone, you bastards. But it is that, but it's because we're in the business of defending things, and it's like a video game where the bosses just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same way. Like, I'm actually from Toronto, which is probably one of the most. It's just one of the cities most eaten through and through by globalism and, you know, cultural Marxism and all this shit. And like, it's really quite depressing. But then, you know, when I go off to, say, somewhere like PEI or Northern Ontario, you know, it just feels a lot more human. And at the end of the day, like, that's kind of really what I'd like in the future. And, you know, how do you kind of deconstruct these guys who just constantly want to deconstruct everything? Like, what do you do in response to that? Like, how do you preserve something when it's constantly under attack by these guys? It's
yeah. I mean, my response has been to deconstruct them, and what you do is, and then at the same time, sort of elevate the authentic. What interests me, I was watching a fishing video, and it's on YouTube, and he's from the northeast, Northumberland, where I live, and he was out with his son. And he does he calls himself like Big Cod's dad or something. And he had this, he was out fishing with his son, and they did a video of it. And they had this English accordion in at the start of it. And it really, I just loved it. I loved that feeling that it gave of the English accordion, and then a dad with his son on the rocks, just teaching his son how to sort of set a rig with cod bait on. And it was that simple thing like that. And I realized that in the mass media, you don't get to see that. You don't get to see anything which represents a specific area. I mean, it's again, it's just this where everything's the same. Everybody gets Ed Sheeran and Beyonce wherever you are in the West. It would be wonderful to have a culture which, or even just as form of music, which was distinct to a certain area in the world, and you could celebrate the local in that way.
Yeah, like an example from the of that in Canada is Newfoundland. Newfoundland in itself kind of has its own culture. They call themselves Newfies, and yeah, it's these little things, like it's these local things that we really like to preserve. Yeah,
it's reflective of the actual lived life of the people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with what they get on the sort of the mediaplex is a sort of fake reality version. It's as if it's replaced the authentic and what's close to hand in the real world, and they live then through the mass media and through reality television and all these products and the adverts that they're getting all of the time. And in this will go for pretty much all of the agendas coming straight through the mass media and then being written into law by the political establishment. And just at the basic local level, I mean, I'm sure the same as you, when I go out fishing or if I'm walking the dog, I always like to have a bit banter on with some fella there just about fishing. And it'll not be political. I'll not, start and red pill them on whatever subject it is. It'll just be a matter of where the local herring were, where did you last catch a mackerel? And it's just like having metal calipers removed from your brain, as I said in the Snowman video. And I think people in the sort of the dissident right should really be embracing that. I mean, I was actually thinking about making a video. It's just called The Joy of Fishing. But why? Because it's always about lifting weights. Everybody has to be a bodybuilder who's in the nationalist seed. And no, I'd like to fish.
Yeah, but I definitely, I think that just kind of finding those little things. I got a question in the chat. Someone asked, "Why don't I move?" I actually am planning on moving. As soon as I get a new job, I'll be headed out of the city because, I guess for those aforementioned reasons, I do kind of want to. I do think that kind of we do need to kind of escape the kind of overreach of the global homoplex and kind of just find something a lot more human. And I think things like fishing and things like just these local things that you can just enjoy. I mean that really is at the end of the day what I'm in it for, because the other problem is you're right that you can't just constantly try to be forcing red pills down people's throats. And this is one reason I think a lot of probably one of the reasons that the kind of populist alt-right kind of fizzed out was that it at the end of the day it was too kind of forceful in that just constantly banging on the problems and just the negative news and the just the urgency.
Yeah,
that kind of got to me at one point. It's it doesn't work. It doesn't work in terms of building a healthy psyche, and it also doesn't work in terms of building a successful movement, because at the end of the day, people do want something. They don't just want to preserve some nation state that they live in, that they're, or they don't want to preserve some state that of depression that they're kind of living in, that I mean, I made the argument in my Maslow's hierarchy of needs video that the West today is still pretty much wealthy and still really safe, but the problem is it's missing all the other needs. It's missing all the kind of the more abstract ones, and I think that's kind of what people are looking for.
Yes, it's the reason behind it all. There's no real reason behind it all except making money and eating pizza. Or I mean, I did a video about the deep fried human nuggets, where it was chicken is this consumption meat of humanity, and it's a bit like the sort of Steven Pinker thing, where all it's about is because chicken's this easily produced mass fodder for the global consumer, and really, like Steven Pinker, I think I actually mentioned him in the article I did, and I did a video on it as well, where really it's just it all comes down to the meaning of it is how much chicken somebody can consume. And that was that, as a stand-in for sort of consumption. And that's the sort of carrot dangling for everybody, where, well, you can't complain too much because look how much chicken you can get. Look at all the chicken you can afford. What are you complaining about? And then there's more jobs. The unemployment's decreasing. So soon you can get a better job and get even more chicken. And it just goes on and on like that. There's like 60 billion chickens a year being slaughtered to feed humanity. And I asked the question, like, is humanity worth 60 billion chickens a year in its present form? If you look at the Western world, are we worth slaughtering 60 billion chickens for to have a bunch of slappers roll around in their own piss with their knickers up their arse in these northern towns in England? And I'm sad to say, no, I don't think it is. We have to start and aspire to impose something on the world which is actually worth living for, to make a lived life, which is actually a lived life. Because, I mean, the twist in the end of the tale is that when it comes down to it, we've ended up being just another chicken. We are to global finance what the chickens are to us.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess if you ask Richard Dawkins, there's 6 billion people, but we're eating 60 billion chickens. I guess maybe, according to him, humanity's not worth it because a chicken and a human are no different.
Yeah. Well, it's speciesist. We're human supremacists.
Yeah, and I think that one of the if you've seen the movie WALL-E, at the end of the movie WALL-E, when they show the humans, they're all like these like big like fat like babies in these levitating chairs. They can't walk, they can't do anything, and they're just kind of having their needs just constantly stimulated. And I really feel like secular liberalism, the end goal really is that, and that's really what they seem to be striving towards. And A, they're not going to get it because for all of the aforementioned reasons. But B, even if you were able to get that, anyone who's seen the movie WALL-E knows that would just be a completely miserable existence. And it's like it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. People need to have more in their life than just constant consumption. And I think that's kind of that's kind of just the real lesson.
Yeah, that's the way it is. I do remember WALL-E vaguely. It is humans. Earth is just a giant trash pile, isn't it?
Yes. Well, in the movie, WALL-E's cleaning up the Earth because it's a giant trash pile, and the humans are up like in space. And yeah, like they have this like futuristic world where they basically have all their needs provided for them. They don't even walk. They just are in these chairs where basically they're just constantly being stimulated. And I think, whether it was intentional or not, I do think that WALL-E really provided a pretty damning critique of globalism, really, and that
I think global homo has bet the farm that everybody on Earth will eventually be absorbed. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that the liberal capitalist project is like the Borg from Star Trek, where it just sort of absorbs everything that it comes in contact with. I mean, the Chinese, say Steven Pinker would argue that the Chinese are doing better now than they've ever done before because they've got skyscrapers and more rice. And they're certainly doing better than what they did under the harsh, pure communism. But when I look back on Chinese culture, like where is that now? Then where's those sort of what you think of as Chinese or Japanese? It's everything just gets reduced to this neon lights and chicken burgers. And it's horrible. Actually, it's absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, you can't really put humanity on a spreadsheet. You can't really rationalize, the things that make life enjoyable.
And that's literally what Steven Pinker has done in his book. it's just page after page of graphs.
And and basically he when people dismiss him, he just says, well, they're racist, they're ignorant, and it's like, no, it's because he wants to turn everyone into these like drones, and at the end of the day, we're still humans, and as long as we're breathing, I don't think we'll want that.
All right.
Well, anyway, I think we'll probably end off shortly. So I guess just any last words on what do you think really kind of going forward, the critique that we need. What's the real critique that you think that we need of the Enlightenment, and I guess what do you think we need in this place?
I think we need to see through the materialism, and when everything will fall away there, I think that's the worst part of it, because you can quibble over the free speech issue and the individualist one, but really it's the materialism of it which is what's got me hooked, because it leads to a world of just raw nihilism. And I know that I'm not the first to say that either. I think that's my part. When you then expand it, as we've been talking about on this stream, to see that it is this sort of grid across the world which has got us enslaved, you then remove the moral sort of authority that they have. And within that, the sort of cultural Marxist SJWs are just more liberals. It's just they're a particularly toxic offshoot of them.
Yeah, and I think that kind of going forward, what we really just need is a good critique of these very, very foundational beliefs that we've had for so long, and just really seeing what societal ills they've created. And both the ones that are pressing, like the migration one, and also the ones that are, and we can talk all we want about migration, Islam, and stuff. I mean, those are pressing issues, but at the same time, there is something deeper that's wrong with I find wrong with modernity, and I think we really need a critique of that. And maybe if we solve those problems, maybe if we actually kind of find something more human, kind of like what we were discussing, like just the very things that we just enjoy, that you don't even need to rationalize. And maybe if we find something in that we really just value, maybe that's what's going to wake people up and really kind of wake them up to the problems that we're facing. Because no one's going to fight for it. No one's going to stand up and fight for a nation state that they hold they're not sentimental over, that they see no value in it. If all they're being offered is just porn, video games, and weed, well, they'll be more than happy to just go off into fade off and in their own filth. But I think that if we actually offer them something human, then I think that's what gets people to stand up and make a difference. Well, anyway, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for coming on, Morgoth, and I'd love to do it again sometime.
All right, I'll see you later. See you later on the chat.
Take care, guys.